Welcome, I'm Butch Delaney, and this is the 10th lesson in the series, I'll Bet You Didn't Know. In these lessons, we're looking for the obscure, the amazing, and the downright strange facts we find in the Bible. I'll bet that you didn't know about some of these facts. Today's lesson is all about the University of Arkansas and the Department of Geology and a government-funded project that has biblical impact. I'll bet you never thought you'd see the day that there was anything happening at our great university that was even remotely connected to the Bible. The Constitution demands no discussion of things religious in our schools. So the Bible is often not mentioned in classes at the U of A. On the one hand, we would not like for any religious institution to be forced upon us by the state, and as a result, we can't even discuss the Bible in class for fear of violating the Establishment Clause in the First Amendment to the Constitution. But there is nothing to halt the advancement of atheistic religion in the university. Back in 2014 and later in 2016, there was a godless conference. And the Coalition of Reason has conducted several yearly conferences in the U of A facilities to promote science and reason and humanist values instead of faith-based values, reasoning in community and government decision-making. To be fair, there are a few religion courses taught. As long as you consider it history, you can get away with having a sprinkling of religious classes. If you consider the Bible as literature, you can find a course or two in the English department. And if you can couch the topic in terms of humanism, politics, philosophy, or women's studies, you can teach certain courses there. But there is one study that could be considered biblical in some ways, and it's being taught in the Fulbright College in their Middle East Studies group. I'll bet you've never even heard of it. It is a complete funding of research and scientific investigation in the King Fahd Center for Middle Eastern Studies into a very historical and very biblical city in the Levant known as Petra. Dr. Thomas Paradise is a researcher in the Department of Geo-sciences, and he focuses his study into the abandoned historical city ruins of Petra. Petra is a marvelous place. It was completely carved into the sandstone clefts with many, many tombs, a marketplace, and numerous dwellings that have been abandoned for centuries. It is a unique glimpse back in history, and it's very biblical, as we're about to find out in this lesson. His studies, along with the full team of students and researchers, focus on the impact of various human and other biological activities in the ancient lost city, particularly related to the loss of sandstone rock. Now, this might seem odd, but the abandoned city is vanishing as a result of moisture and humidity, climate conditions, carbon dioxide emissions from the millions who visit the city each year, and other environmental events like the development of lichen and continual floods over the past many years. His team investigates the impact of several factors on the rocks into which the city was built, and they have found that the average yearly loss of rock in many of the tombs and buildings there simply due to the huge number of people who visit and to marvel at its beauty. Carbon dioxide, which is released by our breath, is literally melting the rock. So, where is Petra? Can it be found in the Bible? I'll bet you do not know. But the best place to look is probably the prophet Obadiah. Petra is in Edom, a very well-known biblical community back at the time of the prophet Obadiah. They hated the Jews of antiquity. They lived in a very mountainous area just south of Jerusalem at the very bottom of the Dead Sea. They actually carved their homes into the sandstone walls of a tremendous valley there. And they were destroyed just as the prophet Obadiah said they would be. Because of their ill treatment of the children of Israel, the prophet warned them that they would vanish from the face of the earth. So if you go to Petra today, you will see there are no modern homes or buildings there at all. There are no roads. There are no Walmart stores. It is a completely abandoned city. Obadiah's message to Judah was this: Edom will disappear, verse 16 of chapter 1. Jacob will consume Esau, verse 18. Now, a bit about how Jacob and Esau fit into this a bit later. In verse 20, Edom will leave the hills and occupy the land of the Philistines, and Jerusalem will rule Edom, just as Isaac promised in Genesis chapter 27. In the 6th century, after the destruction of Jerusalem, Nabatean Arabs invaded Moab and Edom, and they took complete control over the city of Petra. Petra's residents fled to the open fields and plains of the Idumeans, never to return to Petra. Remaining Edomites then were eventually totally subsumed within the nation of Israel. Malachi, the Old Testament writer, attested that the earlier prophecies had come true. In Malachi chapter 1 verse 3, in 100 BC, the Jewish Maccabees came and captured the few Edomites that were living in the province of the Idumeans. They forced them to be circumcised and to follow the law, and many did become practicing Jews. By 100 AD, the Edomites were completely subsumed and lost as a nation. So, who were the Edomites? I'll bet you don't know. The answer is they were the descendants of Esau, brothers to the Jews in some ways. But just as Esau hated Jacob for his taking of his inheritance, they hated the Jews. You recall the story of Jacob and Esau. Esau was firstborn, and as he was born, the hand of his brother Jacob grabbed his foot as he was making his way down the birth canal. There could be no more a sad story than the fact that the firstborn child of Jacob was hated while the younger child was loved. And Jacob's descendants, the Israelites, were loved by God, while the descendants of the Edomites, the descendants of Esau, the Edomites, were not. One day, the tired hunter Esau returned home to find his brother Jacob making a pot of red lentil soup. Famished, he demanded his brother give him some of the soup. And for a bowl of soup, he turned over his inheritance to his younger brother. He was then forever known as Red, or Edom. Jacob received the firstborn's inheritance, and enmity between the Jews and the Edomites persists even to today. Jacob received twice the amount as his older brother, and he received the family's leadership upon his father's death. These were two things that could never be granted by a father to a younger son in that society, but they could be given. Now here is a very odd fact. We don't know much about the details of the trip the Israelites took from the time they left Egypt to the time they arrived in Palestine. We simply don't know all the locations where they stayed. When they arrived at Mount Sinai just days into their journey, and we don't even know where Mount Sinai is today. They wandered around in the desert of Sinai for almost 40 years, and we don't know the actual path they took. This is represented by the various circles in this map, and it is a huge uncertainty. But there is one certainty about that journey. When the large group made it to the Jordan River Valley, they made a very long trip around a land area. Notice the loop in this picture. What do you think could have caused that loop? I'll bet you do not know. What caused the loop was the Jews in captivity, wandering for 40 years now in the desert, finally made their way over to the Jordan Valley, and here they confronted the Edomites, direct descendants of Esau. It was a Jacob versus Esau story all over again. The Jews simply wanted to pass through the Edomites' territory, and they promised to make the trip as fast as they could. But because of the enmity that still existed from the story of Jacob and Esau, they decided to make Moses and the Jews go all the way around. The journey took days instead of hours. The ancestors of the Jews coming out of Egypt never forgot how their brothers, the Edomites, treated them. And the ancestors of Esau, the Edomites, always hated the Jews for stealing their birthright. Now, at the time of the story, the prophet Balaam was called in by the Edomites to bless their action against the Jews. But instead of cursing the Jews, he cursed the Edomites, and he told them that one day Edom would be possessed by the Jews. In about 500 years, the Jews under David would march into Edom and totally destroy them. The Edomites who escaped moved into the area just south of Jerusalem in the province of Idumea in the Palestine land. They were known at the time of Christ as Idumeans. When the king of Babylonia marched into Jerusalem and took them captive in 586 BC, the Edomites living at that time to the south of Jerusalem actually rejoiced. By this time, the Nabatean Arabs had moved into Petra and had run them all away, and they were displaced to an area just south of Jerusalem. No longer were they a large tribe, but relatively small. Still, they hated the Jews, and the Jews hated them. By the time of Malachi, the Idumeans as a nation were almost completely gone. There were not many of them left. Still later, the Idumeans would have their comeuppance against the Jews in a story that involved Jesus Christ. More about that in the next slide. I'll bet you didn't know this. King Herod, the ruler of the Jews at the time, was an Idumean. He was a descendant of Esau. And Jesus, being an Israelite, was a descendant of Jacob. So it was the Jacob and Esau story all over again. Isn't it amazing how history repeats? Edom is located in the Arabah, the area directly under the Dead Sea. Moab lay to its north, the Red Sea was to its south, and to its east was the massive Arabian desert. Now, I want to take you on a virtual tour of the city of Petra as it exists today. It is an amazing city, and it hosts thousands upon thousands of visitors each year. I think you will see why as we move down from our vantage point miles above the earth into the actual present-day city. The old city today is known as Petra, Jordan, and it's located at the point of the arrow in this picture. Moving closer, you can see both the Gulf of Aqaba to the south and the Dead Sea to the north. Notice the north-south ridge of mountainside along the Dead Sea that extends all the way down to the Gulf of Aqaba. Petra is a city literally carved into the walls of the valleys along this ridge. We begin now to see some of the surrounding communities and a bit more of the landscape. Above the valley, looking up to the east, rises Mount Seir, the province of Edom, as described as being in Mount Seir in some verses of the Bible. Continuing our descent, you will notice that there aren't many communities nearby. One community just to the left is known as Paran today. Paran is thought by many to be the city where Hagar brought her son Ishmael after Abraham sent them away into the desert. Now we're getting closer, and you can see a bit more of the landscape. Notice that there's a river that cuts its way through the mountains just to the north of the city. Now, that river is notorious for flooding, and in November 2018, there was a tremendous flood that was in the news. It unleashed millions upon millions of gallons of water into the valley and into the city of Petra. Moving closer, we're getting now close enough to begin to see the outlines of the structures that were built in the city over the ages. Notice the dam in the river. This was the dam that was overrun by the flood in 2018. You can see where the water went then, down into the city itself. We'll be looking at the city and its buildings in more detail in later slides. Dr. Paradise believes that the reason Petra was dormant for so many years was flooding. A severe flood seems to have happened, and those who survived left the city immediately after, and they never returned, while newcomers were afraid to settle there because of the potential for flooding. Now, the city is only about a mile in circumference, so it's not a very large city. Today, there are only a few structures that still exist there. The city, for a time after the Bible and before modern history, was completely lost. It was rediscovered in the 1800s, though, causing great excitement. The rocks of the city are mostly sandstone and mostly red in color. Here you can see the effects of water running over the rocks, smoothing out the surfaces and allowing the layers of sedimentation to show through. It is known as the Red City for the principal color in these rocks, but that name also brings back memories of the original red who made his home here, Esau. It is a city that is scooped out of a plain. On the plain, there is plenty of rainfall, but down in the valley of Petra, there is very little rainfall. The tallest mountain in the area is Mount Seir, and it only rises about 5,000 feet above sea level. An interesting thing about the city is that at the time of Obadiah, and even today, one major access point into the city is through a very narrow gorge called the Seek, and we will look at that later. Inside the city, you will find temples, palaces, and dwellings of all kinds carved into the soft stone rock walls that lined that valley. Much of the architecture you see in Petra today are ruins left behind when the Nabatean Arabs and Romans came into the area a few years before Christ was born and stayed for a couple of hundred years after that. And not much is known about the earlier Edomite kingdom that Isaiah, Jeremiah, Obadiah, Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Ezekiel, and Amos all address. You can see the architectures of all of these people in that city today. This is the Seek. The Seek is a very narrow passageway, about 12 foot wide in some points, along the way and through the mountains leading from west to east. This provided much protection for the city that built its houses as high as eagles' nests, according to Bible prophecy. Now, what would an army do if they were marching through and got to this narrow valley? They realized they would have to go through at some point and have to go through single file mostly. And all the while, the archers above could throw down a barrage of rocks and others could toss rocks and small boulders. The people of the city felt very secure, hemmed in as they were by the mountains that surrounded them. As you exit the mile-long Seek, the first sight you see is the treasury, or the Kesna. Just imagine coming down the Seek and emerging to this beautiful structure. The treasury, built during Nabatean and Roman periods, is one of the more impressive structures in the city. As the first picture shows, you can walk through the narrow door into the rooms and passageways that are cut into the mountain behind it. In the second image, looking at the building from within the Seek, it shows the magnificence that you're about to see when you enter into the city. And then, as the third picture shows, looking from within the treasury and looking back out one of its doorways. You can see the opening of the Sikh. Here is a full view of the treasury. There's not much to see inside, just a few square rooms carved into the mountains. And one of the most interesting findings of Dr. Paradise is this. As people in groups enter the small rooms inside on tours, they exhale carbon dioxide, and they bring the humidity of their sweating bodies into that room. Over the ages, the constant shift from completely dry inside to very high carbon dioxide humidity is actually dissolving the walls by a few millimeters each year. It is something that is very measurable, and it's probable that visits to the structure and others may be halted at some point in the future to stop that decay. If you want to go to Petra, you better make plans to travel there soon. Now, notice the spot that I pointed out here on this slide, on the right side of the picture. It looks like there's a small ridge that's been kind of cut into the side of the rock. Well, here is a view from that exact spot looking down on a tourist group and the great monumental facade of the treasury to the right. Some Bedouins here are actually enjoying the view. This building is known as the monastery. It was a temple built originally to the king Oedipus, who declared himself a god in the 1st century. Later, during the Byzantine period, Constantinople modified this building to be a church in 316 AD. Along one of the hills that form the city are several tombs built at different times in Petra's history. Most of this architecture did not exist at the time of Christ, but was built later. We will examine each of these ruins in the next 4 slides. The Nabatean tomb, is the oldest tomb in the Wall of Tombs. It is of Nabatean origin and was once filled with urns. Hence, it has received the name of the Nabatean urn tomb. Inside were the remains of many. You can see that there were 2 types of architectures built here. The original building, dug into the hillside with its rooms, were built by the Nabatean Arabs, and later during the Roman period, during the first few centuries AD, several other very smaller rooms were built outside on the Roman arches to serve as tomb rooms as well. This is the next building over from the urn tomb. Its Roman structure was carved into the sheer face of one of the mountains. It was built in the class Greco-Roman style, which combined both Grecian and Roman concepts into its architectural style. Another tomb is shown here, built by the Romans just a century after Jesus' day. By AD 100, the population of the city was around 30,000, making it roughly the size of Russellville, Hot Springs, Texarkana, or Sherwood in Arkansas. That's a lot of people. A crude circular theater was built by the Nabateans earlier and later enlarged by the Romans. It sits so that the audience looks to the northwest, where the sun would not glare in their eyes. It has a spectacular backdrop, though, in the Wall of Kings. The Romans loved their theater arts, and in many communities, their coliseums and stadiums still exist, even today. Someone noted that if you do plan to visit Petra, stay at least until dark. This kind of nighttime event occurs regularly there. The walls of the treasury, illuminated by hundreds of candles in the evening, is a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing to see. So here are some lessons that we can learn from Petra. First of all, do not be proudful. Don't depend upon yourself for your salvation. Also, family quarrels can rip a family apart and create long-lasting enmity. Look at the details of this story and be amazed that God planned it all to happen exactly as He promised it would, including the coming of Jesus. Our God is an awesome God. Thank you for watching this lesson all the way to the end. We appreciate it.